guess what? Today we're going to be talking about Splice. I know that a lot of people really hate on Splice because they say it's cheating. Those people are, in my opinion, wrong. For those of you that don't know, Splice is kind of like Google for sound. So you can search for like different samples and then drag them in and use them in your music. It's really useful for basically any kind of production, pop production, rock production, whatever. And it's also really useful for singer-songwriters because you can grab whole chord progressions and and drop them in, and then you can just make songs really, really quickly and make them sound pretty decent for demos, you know, really, really fast. But anyway, if you don't know what it is, go check it out. These are my top 7 secrets for using Splice. They're not actually secrets, I'm just going for the clickbait titles at the minute. They're things that I do every day and I thought that maybe not everyone else did, and they might help you use Splice either more efficiently or find more appropriate samples when you're looking. So number 1 is a little bit of admin. If you use multiple machines, if you've got a laptop and a desktop like I do, then every time you open Splice, make sure you go to the little cog down in the bottom left and click Synchronize Sounds or Sync Sounds. What this does is make sure that anything you've downloaded on your laptop while you're away from your desktop will then be synchronized onto your desktop and vice versa. So when you're looking for samples, they're already downloaded. You don't have to go through and click download on all of them. Make sure you do that every time you use Splice on a different computer, and you'll always have the samples that you know. They'll just already be there, which is really useful. Number 2 is if you search for sound, then on the right-hand side, there's loads of filters. You probably have seen this before. One of the most useful buttons is the loops button. So if you type in hi-hat and click on loops, then it's going to give you a full hi-hat like groove, or it's going to give you a loop that you can then put over your music and repeat, and it will basically play a whole phrase rather than just a single shot. There's also a one-shot button, which will then just be the single shot. But the reason I like the loops button is you can click on loops and then maybe type in like pop chords, or you could type in snare, or you could type in basically anything, and it will come up with a full phrase that you can drag in. This is really useful for you singer-songwriters or for people looking to build their choruses bigger, quicker. So if you click the loops button, you can take these full phrases, drop them into your project, and they're gonna work over whatever you're working on, instead of having to drag in one-shots and then make the groove yourself. I'm not saying only use loops, because there is a point where like when you're listening to music, you can be like, I know that loop, like I've heard that loop before. Here's an example. So yeah, some loops on Splice are literally dragged and dropped, and then they write songs over them and that become big hits, which is kind of cool, but it also means that you need to try and be a little bit more original. So just use loops sparingly, try and like make them your own with EQ and distortion and cut them up and chop them up and stuff, but it's really good for inspiration, and they're really fast. If you're just trying to get an idea down, there's no harm in using loops. So loops, super useful. Number 3, don't use the BPM filter if you can help it. I've never used the BPM filter because I think it's going to cut out far too many options of samples. And basically Logic, Ableton, Reason, all of these, you know, major DAWs have amazing like time flex capabilities where you can just drop the sample in and then flex it to the time you want. So searching by BPM is potentially cutting out samples from the search that you might like that you could really easily make fit your BPM. You don't need to search for an exact BPM. That way you're going to get more interesting samples. Sometimes getting something that's really fast and slowing it down is going to be more interesting than just finding one that was at the perfect BPM. So try not to search by BPM, because you can do most of that fixing in the program. The next one, which I think is number 4. This is kind of like an unofficial thing, and I've never heard anyone talk about it, but a lot of the things you search on Google, you just type what you say or like type what you think, and then Google kind of works out what you mean and gives you the best results. Splice isn't that clever yet, so you need to learn kind of the Splice translation for certain words. So for example, I always thought this was a click, right? Click your fingers, it's a click. In Splice, if you want to find a click sample, it's a snap. Finger snap. Or if you want to find like the noise that goes into a chorus, it's called a riser or rise. And if you want to get the out the chorus, then it could be an exhaust, or you could reverse a riser. Like, it's learning words that will search well on Splice that you probably didn't think of using before. It's kind of like learning how to use the search function on Splice, essentially. Other good ones are, instead of a snare, if you hit the stick on the edge of the snare, that's called a rim shot or a rim. So that's a really useful one instead of like a big snare sound. And also if you want like a more organic kick, instead of a kick, you can have a stomp, where it's just the sound of people stamping their feet or whatever. There's thumps, which are like more thumpy snares. What I'd say is, if you can't find it when you originally searched, try and think about how else you can phrase that sound. Or just have a look through some common packs. I'm sure you'll find the word, and that'll be like the Splice translation of whatever it is you're looking for. And just remember it for next time you're looking for that sound. Okay, number 5 is actually something that you may not know about Splice. So Splice has a lot of different things that you can download from the site. The main thing is samples, that's what most people know it for, but you can also use it to download MIDI progressions, I guess, or like MIDI melodies or MIDI bass lines. So if you go on their website and then click on the MIDI, I think it's on the left hand side, you can download full chord progressions into your DAW and you just drag them in. They cost 3 credits, but you get so many credits, it doesn't really matter. The benefit of doing this is sometimes, like for me, I often struggle with like coming up with inspiring chord progressions, and there are so many on Splice that you can drag in, and then because you've got the MIDI, you can change the chords, you can like change the progression, you can rearrange the rhythm, you can change the instrumentation. Whereas if you get a sample loop of the same chords, you're stuck with whatever was played in the original audio file. So downloading MIDI is far more flexible. Just be aware, you're not going to get the sounds that they sample with on the website. It's just going to play on like a piano in Logic. You're going to have to make the sounds yourself. But that really shouldn't matter. Chord progressions on Splice are super useful. There's also bass lines you can download, or melodies, and I didn't know about this until really recently, but I have been using it more frequently, and you know, the artists that I've used them with have really liked them because it's not the kind of chords that I'd usually reach for. So it's allowing me to be a bit more spicy maybe with my chords. Yeah, so go check out the MIDI options on Splice because you might not have looked through those packs yet. And the last thing with Splice, number 6, isn't actually to do with Splice. I think it's more to do with like mindset when you're thinking about going through these samples. When you're flicking through samples, instead of looking for a perfect match for what you're hearing in your head, instead of listening for like the perfect rhythm, have in mind what you can actually do to that sample in your DAW. So for example, if you've got like a kick and snare loop that's really cool, but you've already got a kick drum in your project and you don't want to have to change the pattern, then you can drop it into your project and just EQ out the kick drum. So now you've just got this snare pattern with like a little bit of kick left. This way you're one, customizing the sample so it's not as recognizable to just drag and drop it into your project, but also it means that samples that you may listen to and be like, oh, I really like that, but it won't fit. You can make it fit. Be it with EQ, with the time stretching we talked about earlier. Sometimes you can like really mess up a sample with like distortion or overdrive, and then it'll fit in a different way. But try and think about how you can be creative when you're flicking through. It doesn't have to be a perfect match to what you want it to do to work really well in your project. One of the best examples for this is kick drums. So usually I layer kick drums. I'll have like a top kick drum, which is like the click and the tonal part of it, and then a sub kick drum, which is the really punchy bit that you feel in your gut when you listen on big speakers. So if your song's a little bit more chilled, you might listen to some of the big subby kick drums and think, that is way too big for my project. But actually, when you've EQ'd out all the top end and you're just left with the punch, after you turn that down, it's perfect. And some of the more acoustic kick drums won't have that thump that you're looking for. So then you can take an acoustic kick drum, EQ the bottom end out and have that as the top, and then you can have a bass kick drum or like a more subby kick and EQ the top and have that as the bottom. So you've got sub and the acoustic one at the top, and it'll work really well in your project. So yeah, try and think about how you can manipulate samples and don't just take them at face value, because that way you're opening yourself up to a lot more options when you're browsing through the menus in Splice. All that being said, Splice is, I think, £6.50 a month, £6.50 a month. It's, you know, one of my most used tools, I think. It's not really a plugin, but I think most producers would agree these days that it's so useful for finding unique samples, or at least different samples for different sounds that you're looking for. It's got a really easy to use interface. Once you've clicked download, you can just drag the audio file straight into your DAW and it'll work just like a normal audio recording would. You get a certain amount of credits every month, but I've never run out and they just accumulate. So now I have like 1,500 or something that I could never possibly spend. And I really recommend you check it out, even if it's just for a month. And if you hate it, then you don't have to carry on, but I'm pretty sure you'll like it. It's a good way of getting top quality industry standard samples for very little money. Anyway, that's been it. Hope you've really enjoyed this video and learned something new about using Splice. If there's anything that I missed, or if there's any ways that you use Splice that maybe I don't know, drop them in the comments below and I'll make sure to put them in the description and maybe make another video about it if it's some really good stuff. Let me know how you use Splice. Make sure you click on the subscribe button down there and the little bell so you'll be notified when I make new videos. And yeah, thanks for checking this stuff out. We've got loads more to come, and if there's any videos you want to see, just drop them below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.